The morning sun bathed the sleek cars in the dealership lot, their polished surfaces gleaming like liquid gold under the bright sky. Inside the glass-walled showroom of Reeves Automotive, salesmen stood ready, their sharp suits and carefully practiced smiles a staple of the business. Every movement, every handshake, and every offer was calculated to maximize profit. It was another busy day, just like any other, but today was different. Among the customers browsing the dealership was a man who blended seamlessly into the crowd. His worn jeans, simple button-down shirt and relaxed posture suggested he wasn't looking for anything flashy. To the sales staff, he was just another middle-aged man shopping for a car. His name, Daniel Reeves. What they didn't know was that he owned the entire dealership chain. Daniel had built Reeves Automotive from the ground up. Over the years, his dealership chain had expanded across multiple states, gaining a reputation for offering quality cars at fair prices. But as his company grew, so did the distance between him and the day-to-day operations of his business. He had started hearing complaints from customers, stories of pushy salesmen, unfair trade-in deals, and dishonest pricing. On paper, everything looked fine. Reports from his managers painted a picture of smooth operations and satisfied customers. But Daniel knew better. Numbers didn't tell the full story, people did. For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. So today, he had come undercover, not as a CEO, but as a customer, not just to observe, but to experience firsthand how his employees treated people when they thought no one was watching. He wandered past rows of gleaming cars, pausing every now and then to run his fingers along the hoods. A salesman noticed him and quickly approached, flashing a confident grin. "Good morning, sir. Looking for something in particular?" Daniel smiled, playing his role. "Yeah, I'm in the market for something reliable, maybe a used sedan. Nothing too fancy." The salesman nodded enthusiastically. "We have some great options. Let me show you what we've got." Daniel followed, listening to the sales pitch, but his real attention was elsewhere. Years of experience had taught him how to pick up on subtle details, the nervous glances of employees, the body language of customers, the conversations happening in hushed tones. And then he heard it. "Please, isn't there anything else you can do?" A woman's trembling voice carried across the showroom. Daniel turned his head slightly, his eyes landing on an elderly couple standing at the trade-in desk. The man was tall but slightly hunched with age, his silver hair neatly combed. His wife stood beside him, gripping his hand, her face creased with worry. Their car, a well-kept but older sedan, sat parked outside, looking out of place among the dealership's newer models. Behind the counter stood Rick Larson, the dealership's sales manager. He was the kind of man who prided himself on making high-profit deals, and from the cold impatience in his voice, it was clear he had no interest in sympathy. "I'm sorry," Rick said with a practiced shrug. "This is the best I can do. That car isn't worth much. You're actually lucky I'm offering this much." Daniel took a step closer, pretending to inspect a car as he listened in. The elderly woman wiped at her eyes. "But this car belonged to our son. He passed away last year. We kept it as long as we could, but we just can't afford the repairs anymore." Daniel's chest tightened. Rick sighed dramatically. "Listen, I understand this is emotional for you, but sentimental value doesn't add dollars to an appraisal. The market price is the market price." The woman's lower lip quivered. "It's not just a car to us. It's the last piece of him we have left." The man squeezed his wife's hand, his jaw tightening. He was trying to stay strong, but it was clear this decision was breaking them. Rick, however, remained unmoved. "The offer stands at $2,000. That's already generous, considering the mileage and wear. If you want to move forward, we can do the paperwork right now. Otherwise," he gestured toward the exit. Daniel felt his blood pressure rise. The sheer coldness of Rick's response infuriated him. This wasn't just a bad deal, it was predatory. He stepped forward. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" Rick turned, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "Sir, this is a private discussion." Daniel kept his expression neutral. "I'm sorry to intrude, but I couldn't help overhearing. I'm actually in the market for a car myself, and that sedan caught my eye." The elderly couple looked at him in surprise, while Rick's eyes narrowed. "It's not for sale. It's being traded in." Daniel rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I might be interested in buying it directly. What's the trade-in value?" Rick hesitated. $2,000. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's it? For a car in that condition?" Rick's expression darkened. "It's an old model, and with that mileage, I'll offer $5,000. The room fell silent. The elderly couple gasped. "Oh no, we couldn't." Daniel held up a hand. "Let's talk outside." Outside, away from Rick's prying eyes, the couple shared their story. Their son had been a firefighter, a hero in their community. His car had been his pride and joy, and after he passed away in the line of duty, they couldn't bear to part with it. But with medical bills piling up and their own health failing, they had no choice but to trade it in for something more manageable. Daniel nodded, taking it all in. "I'll buy the car from you, but not for trade-in." Harold's brow furrowed. "Then why?" Daniel smiled. "Because I don't want it to end up on a used car lot. I'll restore it, keep it in his memory." The woman's eyes welled with tears. "You would do that?" Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out his checkbook. "It's not just a car, it's a legacy." Rick stormed outside just as Daniel handed the couple the check. "You can't just—" Daniel turned to him, his expression unreadable. "We'll talk later, Rick. A long conversation about how you run things here." Rick froze, suddenly uneasy. Something about Daniel's tone sent a ripple of fear through him. He didn't yet realize who he was dealing with. The tension in the air was thick as Daniel Reeves stood outside the dealership, the check for $5,000 still firm in his grip. The elderly couple, Harold and Linda Carter, looked at him as though he had just performed a miracle. Their eyes, filled with years of experience and heartbreak, now glistened with something fragile, hope. "We don't know what to say," Harold murmured, gripping his wife's hand. "No one's ever done something like this for us." Linda wiped at her tears. "You don't even know us. Why would you do this?" Daniel smiled warmly. "Because some things are more important than money." He turned to the sedan, running his fingers over the hood. "This car meant something to your son, and it means something to you. I don't believe in taking advantage of people just because business says I should." Harold swallowed hard, nodding. "He would have liked you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Daniel's stomach twisted at the words. The weight of responsibility pressed on his shoulders. Did his own employees see him that way? Did his dealership still stand for fairness and respect, or had it become just another corporate machine preying on people like Harold and Linda? Before he could say anything, the glass doors of the showroom slammed open behind them. Rick Larson stormed out, his face red with anger. "I need a word with you," Rick snapped, ignoring the couple. "Right now." Daniel exhaled slowly, slipping the check into Harold's hands. "Go get this," he said quietly. "Drive your son's car home with pride." Harold hesitated but nodded, shaking Daniel's hand firmly. "Thank you." As they walked away, Rick's fury erupted. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Rick seethed, stepping closer, his cheap cologne and the stink of desperation filling the space between them. Daniel remained calm. "Helping a customer. Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" Rick scoffed. "That's not how this works." He crossed his arms, his voice lowering. "You just cost this dealership thousands of dollars, and you undermined my authority." Daniel arched an eyebrow. "Authority? I didn't realize your job was to squeeze every last dime out of grieving parents." Rick's eyes flashed dangerously. "Look, I don't know who you think you are." "Who I think I am," Daniel repeated, his voice suddenly steely cold and unmistakably commanding. He took a deliberate step forward, his entire demeanor shifting. For the first time, Rick hesitated. Daniel stared him down. "I own this dealership." The words landed like a bomb. Rick's face went slack. He blinked, his lips parting slightly, as if his brain was struggling to process the revelation. "What?" he finally choked out. Daniel pulled a business card from his pocket, holding it up between two fingers. It bore his full name and the Reeves Automotive logo. "I'm Daniel Reeves," he said, his voice sharp as a knife. "The CEO, the owner, the man who built this company." Rick's entire body went rigid. "And I just watched you disrespect those customers, lie to them about their car's value, and act like this place is a scam operation." Silence fell. Every employee in earshot had frozen, some subtly leaning in, pretending to continue working while eagerly listening. A few looked smug, as if they had been waiting for Rick to get what was coming. Rick stammered, searching for a response. "I didn't know." "You didn't know who I was, so you thought it was okay?" Daniel cut him off. "That's what I find interesting. If I were just some random customer, you wouldn't have thought twice about taking advantage of those people." Rick broke into a nervous sweat. "Listen, Daniel, Mr. Reeves, I was just doing my job, maximizing dealership profits. Isn't that what you want?" Daniel's stomach curled in disgust. Was this what his business had become? Was this what customers experienced when he wasn't looking? How many people had walked through these doors and been treated like fools? He took a deep breath. "No, Rick, that's not what I want." Rick shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, if we start making emotional deals, we'll go under. It's business." Daniel's voice was ice. "No, it's greed." Rick opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. He was losing control. Daniel turned to the gathering employees. "How many of you have been taught to pressure your customers?" he asked, his voice carrying across the room. There was an uneasy shuffling. No one spoke. Daniel nodded, as if he had expected as much. "How many of you have seen customers walk out of here feeling cheated?" Again, no one spoke, but a few cast glances at Rick. A young salesman, Chris, according to his name tag, finally stepped forward. "It happened. Happens a lot." His voice was cautious but honest. "Rick encourages it. He tells us to always lowball trade-ins, even when we know the cars are worth more." Rick whipped around. "Shut your mouth, Chris!" Chris shrunk back, but Daniel held up a hand. "No, Chris, keep talking." The young man hesitated, then gathered his courage. "We're told to push higher interest rates on people who don't ask questions, especially old customers or ones who don't seem financially smart." He swallowed hard. "A lot of people here hate it, but we're afraid of losing our jobs." Rick turned pale. "That's a lie." Daniel's eyes locked onto his. Rick's silence said everything. The employees fidgeted, some looking guilty, some relieved. Daniel could feel the shift in energy. A line had been drawn. This wasn't just about firing one bad manager. This was about fixing a broken system. Daniel finally exhaled slowly. "You're fired, Rick." Rick's head snapped up. "What?" Daniel's voice was calm but absolute. "Get your things and leave now." Rick opened his mouth to argue, but then he saw Daniel's expression. He knew there was no point. He let out a string of curses under his breath, yanking his jacket off the chair. Employees didn't even pretend to be upset. Daniel turned to the staff. "From now on, things change. Customers come first. Fair deals, honest pricing, and full transparency. Anyone who has a problem with that, walk out now." No one moved. Chris stepped forward again. "Thank you, sir." Daniel gave a small nod. "Let's rebuild this place the right way." As Rick stomped out defeated, Daniel watched him go with a quiet sense of finality. This wasn't just a business decision. It was the beginning of a revolution. The tension in the air was still thick after Rick Larson stormed out of the dealership, his footsteps echoing through the showroom like the final chords of a song that had overstayed its welcome. Employees watched his retreat with a mixture of relief and unease. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others, like Chris, The young salesman who had spoken up looked cautiously hopeful. Daniel Reeves, the undercover CEO turned exposed owner, stood tall in the center of it all. He had just fired one of the most corrupt managers in his dealership, but deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Daniel scanned the room, his sharp gaze settling on the employees who had watched in silence as Rick deceived customers. "Let me be clear about something," he said, his voice firm but calm. "This is not just about firing one man. This is about fixing what's broken. If you've been following the same dishonest practices, that stops today." The room was silent. A middle-aged salesman, Tim, shifted uncomfortably before clearing his throat. "Sir, with all due respect, Rick trained us to work this way. It wasn't just him. It was the system." Daniel nodded slowly. "And that's exactly what I plan to change." A murmur rippled through the staff. Change? Real, actual change? Some of them had been working here for years, trapped in a culture where deception was rewarded and integrity was punished. Could Daniel really mean it? "So, what happens now?" another employee asked hesitantly. Daniel took a deep breath. "Now we clean house." By noon, Daniel had gathered every employee in the dealership staff lounge. Papers rustled, coffee machines hummed in the background, and the weight of uncertainty hung heavy. Some employees were nervous, others curious. Daniel leaned against the table, addressing them not as a distant CEO, but as someone who had just seen the reality of their daily struggles. "I know what some of you are thinking," he began. "You're wondering if this is just another corporate speech, another we're making changes talk that ends with nothing actually happening." Several employees exchanged glances. He wasn't wrong. Daniel continued, "I'm here to tell you, this time it's real. We're not just changing a few policies, we're changing the way we do business, starting now." A few skeptics scoffed. One even muttered, "Sure, until corporate gets involved." Daniel smirked. "I think I've got enough pull to make this happen, and if you doubt that, remember I just fired your boss in front of all of you." That shut them up. Chris, the young salesman, leaned forward. "So what does this mean for us?" Daniel folded his arms. "It means every single sale from now on will be transparent. No more hidden fees, no more forced add-ons, and no more preying on customers who don't know better." A low murmur of agreement spread through the room. Tim, the older salesman, sighed. "Sir, I agree with you, but you have to understand something. Some of us have families to feed, making money the way we were trained to. If we suddenly stop, how do we survive?" Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That's why I'm introducing a new commission system. From now on, bonuses will be based on customer satisfaction, not just sales volume." His voice carried conviction. "If you treat customers fairly, you'll still make money. In fact, you might even make more." A ripple of surprise moved through the employees. This was unheard of. "That's actually smart," Chris admitted, eyes widening. Daniel smiled. "I know. It's almost like I've done this before." The room erupted in quiet laughter. The tension was easing, and Daniel could feel the shift. This was how change started. Later that afternoon, Daniel called a mandatory customer service review meeting. He pulled up a file containing every complaint and negative review his corporate office had received about this dealership in the past year, and there were a lot. One by one, he read the real stories from customers who had been deceived, ignored, or pressured into deals they didn't understand. One review stood out. "I came in for a used car and was offered a deal that seemed fair at first, but when I got home, I realized they had added a $1,500 extended warranty I never agreed to. I called back, and the manager, Rick, told me it was non-refundable. I feel completely ripped off. I wouldn't recommend this dealership to anyone." Chris clenched his jaw. "That's disgusting." Tim sighed, shaking his head. "I remember that sale. She was a young mother. She didn't have a lot of money." Daniel's gaze was hard and unwavering. "Then we're fixing it." He turned to his assistant. "I want the list of every customer who was overcharged, misled, or treated unfairly. We're calling them back and making things right." The room fell silent again. Chris's eyes widened. "You're serious?" Daniel nodded. "Dead serious." By late afternoon, Daniel was sitting in the dealership's office, personally making phone calls to customers who had been wronged. "Hello, Mrs. Thomas? This is Daniel Reeves, the owner of Reeves Automotive. I just wanted to call and personally apologize for the way you were treated when you bought your car." The silence on the other end lasted a beat before the woman choked out a disbelieving laugh. "Wait, you're the Daniel Reeves? You're calling me?" "Yes, ma'am, and I'd like to make things right." Daniel heard the emotion in her voice. She had probably spent months feeling scammed, believing there was nothing she could do. This wasn't just about money. It was about rebuilding trust. As Daniel ended the last phone call, he leaned back in his chair, exhausted but satisfied. The dealership wasn't perfect. It was still healing, still learning, but today, for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was on the right path. Chris knocked on the office door, grinning. "We just got 3 walk-ins asking if the rumors were true, if the owner was actually fixing bad deals. I think people are starting to notice." Daniel smiled. "Good. Let's keep proving them right." Tomorrow, the dealership would open with a new mission, and Daniel would be there, watching, leading, and making sure no customer was ever taken advantage of again. The next morning, Reeves Automotive felt different. The air was lighter. The tension that had weighed down the showroom just 24 hours ago seemed to have lifted, at least partially. But Daniel knew that change didn't happen overnight. What had happened yesterday was a statement. Today was the first real test. Daniel arrived earlier than usual, parking his car across the street to observe before stepping inside. He watched as employees filtered into the showroom, some looking determined, others still unsure about what his changes meant for them. Would they truly adapt to this new way of doing business, or would they resist and try to find loopholes? Daniel didn't expect perfection. He expected growth. As he walked in, Chris, the young salesman who had spoken up against Rick, was already setting up his desk. He looked up and grinned. "Morning, boss." Daniel chuckled. "You don't have to call me that." Chris smirked. "Well, it's better than hey, mysterious guy who pretended to be a customer." Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "Fair point." Tim, the older salesman, joined them, his expression thoughtful. "You really meant everything you said yesterday, didn't you?" Daniel nodded. "Every word." Tim sighed. "Then I guess I should apologize." Daniel tilted his head. "For what?" Tim hesitated. "For standing by and letting Rick run this place the way he did. I saw a lot of things I didn't agree with, but I needed the job. I told myself it wasn't my place to question." Daniel respected the honesty. "You're here now, doing the right thing," he said. "That's what matters." Tim gave a small nod, his shoulders relaxing slightly. As they spoke, a familiar figure entered the showroom. Daniel turned and his eyebrows lifted in surprise. Harold and Linda Carter, the elderly couple from yesterday. Linda's eyes sparkled as she took in the dealership, as if seeing it through an entirely new lens. Harold, meanwhile, walked with purpose, his usual cautious demeanor replaced with something stronger. Determination. Daniel immediately crossed the showroom to greet them. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," he said warmly. "I wasn't expecting to see you back so soon." Harold extended a hand and Daniel shook it firmly. "We wanted to thank you," Harold said, his voice steady. "Not just for what you did for us, but for what you're doing here." Daniel blinked, taken aback. Linda smiled softly. "Word spreads fast in this town, Mr. Reeves. People are talking about how you stood up for us, how you fired that awful man and made things right. We're not the only ones who were mistreated." Daniel felt a slow-growing realization settle over him. This wasn't just about one dealership. This was about the entire community. Just as Harold finished speaking, the glass doors swung open again. This time, a young woman in her mid-30s walked in, her expression a mixture of frustration and hope. She clutched a folder of papers against her chest, as if they were evidence in a court case. A receptionist approached her, but before she could speak, the woman locked eyes with Daniel. "Are you the owner?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes. How can I help you?" The woman exhaled sharply, stepping forward. "My name is Rebecca Sanders. Last year, I bought a used car from this dealership, a Ford Explorer." Daniel motioned for her to sit. "Go on." Rebecca's voice shook as she continued. "The salesman told me I was getting a good deal, that my financing was set up to be affordable. But when I got home and went through the paperwork, I realized they had added fees I never agreed to." Daniel's jaw tightened. This was exactly the kind of deceitful behavior Rick had encouraged. "I tried calling back," Rebecca went on, "but I kept getting the runaround. They told me it was too late to change anything. I ended up paying almost $3,000 more than I expected." A few employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had heard complaints like this before. Daniel took a breath. "I'm sorry that happened to you." Rebecca searched his face for dishonesty. She had clearly been lied to before. "That's not enough," she said, her voice hardening. "I don't want an apology. I want to know what you're going to do about it." Daniel didn't flinch. "Let's pull up your file and see exactly what happened." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Just like that? Just like that?" As Rebecca sat down, Chris pulled her file from the system. The numbers were all there, clear as day. Daniel exhaled slowly as he scanned it. They had done exactly what she said, pushed unnecessary fees, inflated financing terms. Chris frowned. "Sir, this contract was written by Rick." Daniel wasn't surprised. Rebecca crossed her arms. "So?" Daniel leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "So we're fixing it." Rebecca blinked. "Excuse me?" Daniel tapped on the contract. "You were overcharged. That's unethical, and I won't allow it." He turned to Chris. "I want the additional charges removed. Calculate what she overpaid and issue her a refund." The entire showroom fell into stunned silence. Rebecca's breath hitched. "You're serious?" Daniel nodded. "Completely." Her eyes filled with emotion. "I thought I'd never get my money back." Daniel offered a small smile. "Today, we changed that." As Rebecca left, her check in hand and gratitude written all over her face, Daniel noticed something. Customers in the showroom had stopped pretending not to listen. They had seen everything. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see that? He just gave her a refund." "I've never seen a dealership do that before." Maybe this place really is different now. Daniel turned to Chris and Tim, noting their reactions. Chris looked proud. Tim looked thoughtful. Daniel smiled. This wasn't just about one refund. This was about trust, and trust once earned could change everything. The next few days at Reeves Automotive felt like a new beginning. With Rick Larson gone, customers were being treated with honesty and fairness, and employees were adjusting to the new policies. Some had embraced the change wholeheartedly, while others were still skeptical. But one thing was clear. Word was spreading fast. The morning after Daniel issued Rebecca's refund, he arrived at the dealership early and found something surprising. A line of customers outside the door. People who had heard the rumors that Reeves Automotive was righting its wrongs. By the time the dealership opened, calls were pouring in. Customers wanted to know if they could have their past deals reviewed, if they could trust this place again. Chris, the young salesman, looked at Daniel with awe. "Boss, I think we just started something bigger than we realized." Daniel smiled. That was the goal. But while Reeves Automotive was thriving, someone else was watching, and they weren't happy. By lunchtime, Daniel received a call he didn't expect. Michael Langford, the owner of Langford Motors, a competing dealership in the next town over. Langford's dealership had been one of Reeves Automotive's biggest rivals for years. Unlike Daniel, Langford didn't build his reputation on quality or fairness. He built it on slick marketing, aggressive sales tactics, and cutthroat pricing. And right now, he wasn't happy. Daniel picked up his office. "Langford, what can I do for you?" Langford's voice was smooth but tense. "I heard about what you're doing, Reeves." Daniel leaned back in his chair. And I'm warning you, buddy, you're setting a dangerous precedent." Langford's tone turned sharp. "You start refunding people, giving them fair deals. You think it stops here? This industry doesn't work like that." Daniel smirked. "No, it works by taking advantage of people. I'm done with that." Langford chuckled, but there was an edge of frustration. "You think you're some kind of hero? Newsflash, Reeves, this isn't a charity. People don't buy cars because they trust you. They buy from the place that gives them the best deal on paper." Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. "Maybe that's how you do business. I don't." Langford sighed dramatically. "Fine, be the good guy, but don't expect it to last. Sooner or later, the bottom line will catch up with you." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Are you calling to threaten me, Langford? Because I've got a busy day actually helping customers." Langford let out a low chuckle. "No, Reeves. I'm calling to let you know that I'm coming for your customers. If you think I'm just going to let you steal the spotlight, you're dead wrong." The line clicked off. Daniel slowly put the phone down, his mind racing. Langford wasn't just bluffing. By mid-afternoon, the first signs of Langford's retaliation appeared. Chris rushed into Daniel's office. "Sir, we've got a problem." Daniel looked up. "What is it?" Chris hesitated. "Customers are leaving." Daniel frowned. "What? Why?" Chris exhaled. "Langford's undercutting every deal we offer." Daniel's hands tightened into fists. Sure enough, when he stepped into the showroom, a middle-aged couple was talking to Tim at the desk. "I appreciate the offer," the man was saying, "but we just got a call from Langford Motors. They're offering the same car for $2,000 less." Tim looked frustrated. "But we've given you the best deal we can." The man shrugged. "We'd love to buy here, but that's a lot of money to pass up." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. Langford was doing exactly what he threatened, luring customers away with lower prices. Daniel stepped forward. "Sir, can I ask you something?" The man nodded. "Did Langford tell you how they're making up for that discount?" The man blinked. "What do you mean?" Daniel leaned in slightly. "Did they tell you about the hidden fees, the financing tricks, the mandatory warranty add-ons they'll push at the last minute?" The man's expression shifted. His wife looked at him. "They didn't mention any of that." Daniel nodded. "That's because they don't want you to know. They lure you in with a lower price, but when you sit down to sign, suddenly the deal isn't what they promised." Tim pulled up something on his computer. "Look here, sir. We've had multiple customers come back to us after Langford tricked them. They thought they were getting a better deal until they saw the final paperwork." The couple exchanged a look. Then the man said, "We'll stick with you guys." Daniel smiled. "That's a smart choice." That night, as the dealership closed for the day, Daniel gathered his staff. "Langford is trying to kill our momentum," he said, "and he's using price as a weapon." Chris frowned. "So what do we do? Drop our prices even lower?" Daniel shook his head. "No, we don't play dirty, we play smart." He turned to Tim. "Pull up a list of every customer who has left a negative review about Langford Motors in the past 2 years." Tim's eyebrows shot up. "Why?" Daniel smirked. "We're going to remind people what Langford really stands for." The next morning, Reeves Automotive launched a campaign. They sent personalized emails and social media messages to former customers who had been cheated by Langford. The message was simple. "If you were misled by Langford Motors, bring your paperwork to us. We'll review it for free. No tricks, no hidden fees, just honesty." Within hours, the first few customers arrived. By midday, there were dozens. By evening, it was a flood. People were furious. Some had been overcharged, some had been forced into bad financing, and others had been tricked into add-ons they never wanted. Daniel and his team helped each one. By the end of the week, Langford Motors was feeling the heat. Calls from angry customers poured into his office. Bad reviews skyrocketed. His staff panicked. Then Daniel received another call. It was Langford, and this time he wasn't laughing. "You think you won, Reeves?" Langford spat. "You're ruining me." Daniel's voice was calm, steady. "No, Langford, you ruined yourself." And with that he hung up. The air inside Reeves Automotive was buzzing with energy. For the past week, customers had poured in, eager to escape the deceptive practices of Langford Motors. The once damaged reputation of Reeves Automotive was restoring itself faster than anyone expected. Daniel should have been celebrating. Instead, he was waiting, because he knew Langford wasn't the type to back down quietly. And soon enough, his enemy came knocking. Late that afternoon, the doors of the dealership swung open with force. Michael Langford strode in, flanked by two of his top sales managers. His expensive suit, normally pristine, was slightly disheveled. His expression, usually smug and confident, was tight with frustration. Daniel, standing near the front desk, simply folded his arms. "Langford," his voice was calm. Langford forced a smirk. "Reeves, I figured I'd come congratulate you. Looks like you're enjoying your little victory." Daniel tilted his head. "Little victory? You mean restoring honesty to my business?" "Yeah, I'd say it's a big one." Langford let out a short, humorless laugh. "You really think this is sustainable? You've been giving out refunds, cancelling fees, and doing all these good guy things." He took a step closer. "That's not how dealerships survive. Eventually your numbers are going to drop and your people are going to turn on you." Daniel held his gaze. "My people are with me because they believe in what we're building. That's why we're winning." Langford's jaw clenched. "You don't get it, do you?" he spat. "You embarrassed me, made a fool of my business." Daniel's eyes darkened. "You did that to yourself." Langford's anger flared, his voice lowered. "You should have stayed in your lane, Reeves." Daniel remained unmoved. "Are you threatening me, Langford?" A tense silence followed. Langford's fingers twitched like he wanted to throw a punch, but he didn't. He wasn't used to losing, and he had one last card to play. That evening, just before closing, a crisis hit. Chris ran into Daniel's office, his face pale. "Boss, you're not going to believe this." Daniel stood. "What happened?" Chris handed him his phone. "Langford just went public." Daniel's eyes narrowed as he read the headlines. "Langford Motors exposes Reeves Automotive's refund scam." Michael Langford claims that Reeves Automotive is misleading the public by offering selective refunds to cover past dishonest sales. In an exclusive interview, Langford alleges that the dealership is losing money rapidly and will soon be forced to close. Daniel tightened his grip on the phone. Langford was trying to spin the truth, trying to paint Reeves Automotive as the bad guy. Chris shook his head. "People are already talking about it. Some customers are second-guessing us. They think this whole thing is just a marketing stunt." Daniel set his jaw. Langford had played his final trick. Now it was time to end this. The next morning, Daniel called for a press conference. He stood outside Reeves Automotive, surrounded by reporters, customers, and employees. The energy in the air was electric as cameras flashed. Daniel stepped forward. "Good morning. I won't waste your time, Poir. I'm here to address the accusations made against my dealership." The crowd hushed. "Michael Langford says we're running a refund scam, that we're lying to customers, that we're going to collapse." Daniel paused, letting the words sink in. Then he smiled. "Langford is right about one thing. Our business model is different, but it's not a scam. It's called integrity." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Daniel continued. "I'm not ashamed to say that, yes, we refunded customers who were mistreated. We corrected bad deals. We took responsibility for the past." He looked directly into the cameras, and we continue to do so. Reporters scribbled furiously. Daniel wasn't playing defense. He was owning the truth. "Langford Motors wants you to believe that honest business can't survive, that we need to deceive customers to make money." He shook his head. "That's a lie, and we're proving it." Chris, Tim, and the other employees stood proudly behind him. Customers in the crowd began clapping. Then something unexpected happened. A man stepped forward. It was one of Langford's former employees, a salesman from Langford Motors. He held up a folder of papers. "I quit my job at Langford this morning," he announced. The crowd turned to him. The man looked at Daniel. "Everything you said about Langford? It's true." He handed the folder to a reporter. "These are records of the hidden fees they charged customers, the fake discounts, the financing scams." The crowd erupted in gasps. Langford's own employee had just exposed him. Daniel felt a rush of satisfaction. Langford had lost, not just because of Daniel, but because of the truth. That evening, Reeves Automotive was flooded with customers. People who had once doubted the dealership were now lining up to do business. Langford Motors, meanwhile, was in free fall. News outlets ran stories on their fraudulent practices. Customers demanded refunds, and within a month, Langford Motors shut down. A year had passed since the war with Langford. Daniel sat at his desk, looking out at the thriving dealership. Sales were up, employees were happier than ever. Chris had been promoted to sales manager. Tim was now training new employees in ethical sales. Most importantly, customers trusted them again. Daniel picked up a letter on his desk. It was from Harold and Linda Carter. They had sent him a photo of their son's old car, fully restored. A note was written at the bottom. "Thank you for proving that good people still exist in business. Our son would have been proud of you." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had started this journey to fix his business, but in the end he had built something greater, a legacy of honesty, and that was worth more than any sale.